From Pacifica, this is Democracy Now!
The general article in Wired magazine reported this month that a whistleblower formerly employed by the NSA has stated NSA Signals Intercepts include, quote, eavesdropping on domestic phone calls and inspection of domestic emails, end quote.
The NSA on the hot seat. Watch what you say, because they are. The National Security Agency is building the country's biggest spy center, a project of immense secrecy. Flowing through its servers, the complete contents of private emails, cell phone calls, Google searches, and more. It's in Bluffdale, Utah. We'll speak with investigative reporter James Bamfield, who's been monitoring the NSA for more than 30 years. He says it's the realization of the Total Information Awareness Program rejected during the Bush years. Then former NSA whistleblower Thomas Drake.
Truth tellers, such as myself, are those who are simply doing their jobs and honoring their oaths to serve their nation under the law of the land. Truth may be inconvenient. It may cause embarrassment. It may threaten the powers that be and their unlawful activities, but it is still the truth. I have but this one life to live.
Thomas Drake was initially charged under the Espionage Act for leaking information about waste management at the NSA. The case against him later collapsed. He'll join us in studio. All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Orlando area prosecutors are convening a grand jury to investigate the killing of the unarmed African-American teenager Trayvon Martin nearly 1 month after his death. On Tuesday, Florida State Attorney's Office for Brevard and Seminole counties said a grand jury will begin hearing evidence next month, 1 day after the Justice Department also announced a civil rights probe of the case. Martin was walking in a gated community in Florida town of Sanford when he was shot dead by George Zimmerman, a self-appointed neighborhood watchman. Zimmerman claims he was acting in self-defense even though he was the one following Martin. Martin himself was unarmed. He weighed 80 pounds less and can apparently be heard on 911 phone call pleading for help. Local police have sided with Zimmerman, refusing to arrest him or press charges. On Tuesday, Benjamin Crump, an attorney for Martin's family, slammed the Sanford police.
The family does not trust the Sanford Police Department to investigate it fairly and impartially because the previous lies that they feel they've been told by the Sanford Police Department. And it's sad because had they just arrested George Zimmerman, it would have silenced a lot of their concerns and questions. Self-defense is a legal argument that you make in a courtroom, not an argument you make on the side of the road to a police and get to go home and go to bed or flee even.
More audio recordings have been released showing Trayvon Martin's killer. George Zimmerman has a history of calling local police to report the sight of African-American men in his neighborhood. This is one of those calls.
I'm with the Neighborhood Watch, and we've had some burglaries and vandalism lately. And this gentleman was walking in the neighborhood. I've seen before on trash days, going around picking up trash. I don't know what his deal is.
Is he white, black, or Hispanic?
It's black.
Trayvon Martin was wearing a hooded sweatshirt when Zimmerman called police to report him as suspicious. Later today, supporters around the world are being urged to don hooded sweatshirts and upload pictures to social media websites under the hashtag #MillionHoodies. Martin's parents are scheduled to appear at a Million Hoodie rally in New York's Union Square today. Mitt Romney has scored a lopsided victory in the Republican primary in Illinois, beating out top rival Rick Santorum. Romney addressed supporters near Chicago while Santorum spoke in Pennsylvania.
And tonight we thank the people of Illinois for their vote and for this extraordinary victory. Thank you so much. And you know, elections are about choices. And today, hundreds of thousands of people in Illinois have joined millions of people across the country to join our cause.
If you look at what's going to happen tonight, we're going to win downstate, we're going to win central Illinois, we're going to win western Illinois. We won the areas that conservatives and Republicans populate, and we're very happy about that. We're happy about the delegates we're going to get, too.
The top U.S. commander in Afghanistan says he won't be recommending any further reductions of U.S. troops until later this year after the November elections. Speaking before the House Armed Services Committee, General John Allen also confirmed the NATO occupation has lost 13 soldiers to attacks from Afghan forces so far this year.
Just since the 1st of January, the coalition has lost 60 brave troops in action from 6 different nations. 13 of them were killed at the hands of what appear to have been Afghan security forces, some of whom were motivated, we believe, in part by the mishandling of religious materials. I wish I could tell you that this war was simple and that progress could easily be measured, but that's not the way of counterinsurgencies. They are fraught with both successes and setbacks which can exist in the same space and in the same time, but each must be seen in the larger context of the overall campaign. And I believe the campaign is on track.
The attorney for the U.S. soldier accused in the massacre of 16 Afghan civilians spoke out again on Tuesday after meeting with his client at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas. John Henry Brown said Robert Bales does not remember the shootings and added he thinks there's very little evidence against his client.
He has some memories of what occurred that evening and before the supposed incident, and he has some memories for what happened after the alleged incident, but he really doesn't have memory for what happened between. There's no forensic evidence. There's no medical examiner's evidence. There's no evidence about how many alleged victims or where those remains are. So, you know, it's fascinating from a defense lawyer's perspective. You know, prove it.
There's no evidence of a crime.
No, I don't know. I really don't know. Certainly from what I've read, there's very little.
The Obama administration has exempted nearly a dozen countries from sanctions intended to punish countries that purchase oil from Iran. The waiver will apply to Japan and 10 other European nations. The move came as President Obama delivered his annual message to the Iranian people on the Persian New Year of Nowruz. In his statement, Obama said the U.S. is seeking to reach out to Iran's people despite imposing crippling sanctions.
Even as we've imposed sanctions on the Iranian government, today, my administration is issuing new guidelines to make it easier for American businesses to provide software and services into Iran that will make it easier for the Iranian people to use the Internet. The United States will continue to draw attention to the electronic curtain that is cutting the Iranian people off from the world. And we hope that others will join us in advancing a basic freedom for the Iranian people, the freedom to connect with one another and with their fellow human beings.
Palestinian prisoner Hannah Shalabi has been transferred to an Israeli hospital after nearly 5 weeks on hunger strike protesting Israel's administrative detention practices. A medical rights group is warning Shalabi, who was arrested last month, is in grave danger. A lawyer for Shalabi said she's lost 35 pounds but is continuing her strike. The U.S.-backed monarchy in Bahrain is vowing to proceed with the prosecution of 20 medics jailed for treating demonstrators during anti-government protests last year. The medics were sentenced by a military tribunal last September, but are now being retried in civilian court. The announcement that the trial will proceed follows suggestions from the Bahraini government that the case against most of the medics would be dropped. Hundreds of homes have been damaged in Mexico after an earthquake struck near the southern state of Oaxaca. The 7.4 magnitude quake also injured around a dozen people, but no major damage has been reported. California prisoners and their advocates are calling on the United Nations to investigate the state's solitary confinement units as a form of torture. More than 4,000 prisoners in California are kept in so-called segregated housing, half of them for alleged ties to gangs. Under the current policy, gang members are made to stay in isolation for 6 years unless they inform prison officials they have left the gang. Advocates compare the treatment of thousands of prisoners in California's isolation units to the U.S. treatment of prisoners at Guantanamo. Activists arrested during the Occupy Wall Street protests in New York over the weekend have spoken out about the police crackdown. On Tuesday, the activists joined with other victims of police brutality for a march to police headquarters in Manhattan.
It is when we speak out against the 1% and defy them by fighting for public space that we are brutalized. On Saturday night, as I simply sat in a park, I was violently arrested with my friends and watched as bloodthirsty cops stomped on their faces, knelt on their necks, pulled them by their hair, and slammed them into windows. I watched as one friend was treated as a battering ram as they carried him into an MTA bus, slamming his head on every step and seat as they went along. I watched as a young woman's rib was broken, as she hyperventilated, convulsed, and seizured in the middle of the street.
That was Jen Waller. The Supreme Court has ruled state employees cannot sue their employer if they're illegally denied medical leave. In a 5-4 decision, the court ruled state immunity from lawsuits involving monetary damages should apply to cases where employees are denied time off for illness or the sickness of family members under the Family and Medical Leave Act. The case was brought by a Maryland state employee who was fired after his request for a 10-day medical leave to deal with hypertension and diabetes. The request was denied. And the Federal Communications Commission has announced it will make room in the airwaves for a new round of community radio stations. Among new policies adopted by the FCC are efforts to foster low-power FM radio stations in densely populated urban areas. Community radio advocates have hailed the decision, saying it will pave the way for the first new urban community radio stations in decades. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Mimi Goodman.
And I'm Nermeen Sheikh. Welcome to our listeners and viewers around the country.